Hello, fellow travelers. Welcome back to Fate's Wide Wheel. I'm your host, Sam Fain, and I am joined this week by JJ Lindell. JJ, how are you?
I'm doing very well. It's a new year.
It is a
All the
new
possibilities.
year. That's right. That's right. 8 days in, anything could happen.
Yes.
Real quick, I wanted to take a moment to just mention, of course, the fact that, yes, last week was a week off. It was difficult last week to figure out kind of what to talk about. Of course, the last episode that I had done was the interview with Georgina, which was such a joy, and she was fantastic. I loved getting the chance to talk to her. I thought it was a wonderful way to sort of pay tribute to Matt. It also kind of felt like a wonderful way to pay tribute was to just take a week off. And partly because I was invited so kindly to be on the Quantum Leap podcast and their tribute episode for Matt. And I just wanted that to be out there. And the response to that has just been lovely. And I know that they all really appreciate the support and the kindness that the community has shown. Matt's loss will reverberate for a very, 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 very long time. And those of us that loved him will always love him. And I think about him every single day. And it's been difficult to kind of navigate what to do next in some ways, because there's, of course, that impulse to keep going and keep talking about the things that we know that Matt would love and would want to be talking about and want us to be talking about. But there's also some sadness attached to that, and some melancholy and some grief, and the fact that, he's not here to have those conversations with, and he's still the first person I think of when I see something. Raymond Lee posted something on Instagram earlier this week, about how the Quantum Leap writers are crazy. And the first thing I wanted to do was, reach out to Matt. And I still have to remind myself that I can't do that. So all that is to say, I think that in a way, a week off was kind of what we all needed. And that's not because I didn't want to talk about Quantum Leap, that I didn't want to talk about other things, that I didn't want to share the screen and the mic with JJ, that I didn't want to virtually reach out to all of you that are watching and listening and have been along for the ride since, the beginning or even just a couple of weeks ago if you started watching. Because I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that sense of community. And I know, while I certainly don't want to speak for anyone else, I think that there are a lot of people right now that feel that way, that they're very grateful for that sense of community, because it has been something that it helps. You need community, you need ritual, and you need community when you're grieving and mourning. You need those two things in particular. And I think that we were able in some fashion, for ourselves, to accomplish that ritual by getting together and talking about Matt the way that we did, and the sense of community, of course, that comes out of that has been wonderful as well. Chief among my thoughts are always, of course, Sharon and Zach. And I know that the funeral service for Matt is planned for January the 19th. There will actually be a stream of the service. Sharon wanted to do that. She knew that there were a lot of people that knew and loved Matt that aren't in the UK, that are unable to make it. So it will be available, of course, to live stream 11:15 a.m. And I'll put a link in the show notes for that. And that's local UK time. So, of course, that's going to be like, 6, 5, 4, 3 o'clock in the morning if you're in the US, depending on where you are. The cool thing that she's doing is it will be available for 7 days following, so that you'll be able to view it at a time that might make more sense for you if you so choose, which of course is a wonderful way, I think, to just kind of continue those memories. Of course, the GoFundMe for Matt's family is also still live. It is amazing to see the outpouring generosity from folks that knew of Matt, whether they bought a book, were a co-host on a podcast, are in the show that he covered, whatever the case may be. That support has just been incredible to see, and I hope it can continue and continue on. I can certainly say for a fact, I have permission to say this, that the cast and crew of Quantum Leap are thinking of Matt and literally keeping Matt in their thoughts as they get ready to produce the final few episodes of this season, including the finale, which has been written, and the cast has the script, and that may be what Raymond Lee was talking about when he tweeted or when he sent that Instagram out. All I can say, mostly because it's all I know, I don't know anything. And again, I have the blessing to say this, is that people are very, very, very excited about what they're doing for the finale, that it's going to be something special. And the fact that, Matt is in their thoughts as they're producing that, I think is really cool. And, there will be a dedication, which is also amazing, and I don't know exactly when it will come, but keep your eyes and ears peeled. Both here in Quantum Leap Project or podcast, excuse me. We'll share that info when it's appropriate, if it's appropriate, or of course, on social media. Pay attention to the cast and crew there; they might be able to share it, before any of us do, obviously. So. That said, Matt is just ever in my thoughts, and producing the podcast, it will always be associated with him in some way, and I'm going to try to approach it with the kindness and joy and openness that I know that he had done and would do, and fun, and just have fun, because I think that that's one of the best ways that I could possibly honor his memory and all of the things that I learned from him, which there are genuinely quite a few. Now, JJ, I know that you never had the chance to meet virtually or otherwise Matt, but obviously you knew of him, and you're one of the very first people that I spoke to on the phone, that day, because I'd corresponded with a couple of people, through text or messenger or whatever. But would you like to have the opportunity to just talk a little bit about Matt and your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, well, first of all, I mean, Sam, I'm just so sorry for your personal loss and just the loss to the entire fan community. And I just think your words are so eloquent in kind of putting Matt's life and everything that he's done into perspective. And for myself, no, I never had the opportunity to meet him, or, virtually or otherwise, but I knew of him, of course, through everything that he had done in the fan community. I mean, he was kind of like a rock star in that way. And, starting back with the book, which, I feel like every Quantum Leap fan knows, because, there's not a ton of Quantum Leap tie-in, literature, and certainly like nonfiction literature out there. And,
Right.
It's just incredible that, someone who is a fan of a series can make such an indelible mark in that world. And more importantly, just in the lives of so many other people who connected over the show. To the point where, again, like, I never met the guy, but I knew his work. I watched the podcast, on YouTube, and I've seen him on your podcast, and, to just have that kind of ripple effect out into the world. And, and this is someone who lives in Europe, and, you and I are here in the United States, singing his praises. And I mean, that's a legacy. It really is. And it's a special kind of legacy. And obviously he's got his family, he's got his, his wife and his son, but he's got all of these people all around the world that are thinking of them all because of his passion, and all the things that he did with it, which, that's, however long your life is, that's just to me, such a sign of a life well lived. And even if he didn't have as many years as he should have, he used the ones that he had so wisely. And the fact that so many people are thinking of him now is all the evidence that you need of that. So, my thoughts are with his family and with everybody in the community. And, it's hard to continue on after a loss like this. And, Sam, I know that you've lost people, and I lost my mother, about 2 years ago. And, grief is a funny little thing. And it can make you feel sad when you're happy. And And sometimes it can make you happy when you're sad because it's making you think about the person that you miss. And in a way, you feel like you're with them. So it's this strange thing. And, I've shared this with people after my mom passed away, because it's something that I had been told is that, you know, grief is, it's like a balloon, and it's this big balloon in a room with you, and it can feel like it's suffocating you. But the trick is not to try and make the balloon smaller, because the grief is always going to be there. You have to make the room bigger. You have to expand the room out, and you have to make space in your life for that grief, but you have to make space around it. And you have to learn not to push it away or not to minimize it, but your heart kind of has to get bigger so that you have more space around it, if that makes any sense. And I just hope that, I hope that his family is coping the best that they can, and that everybody in the community is able to do that and just sort of like grow their hearts around the grief so that they have space to love the things that they love, but also remember this kind and generous and passionate man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, JJ. I didn't really give you a heads up that I was going to ask you to say anything, but I'm so glad that I did, because I just think that was beautiful, and I completely agree. And it is difficult to make that space sometimes, but it's necessary. And I think that one of the ways that sometimes you can make that space is by creating a room for that person to live on in your life, and the way that you honor their memory, and that you keep them you keep them alive in some ways. And I think that that's kind of sometimes the best that we can do. There's a beautiful quote that was shared in a messenger group, which it's so funny because I had actually been thinking about it even before it was shared, but then once it was shared, I was just sort of like, yes, I mean, I think we all get it. But this group was a group of people actually that Matt had reached out to, I believe, about the Kickstarter campaign before it started for Volume 3. And so those of us that were kind of in that thread, had been talking about Matt and continuing to like share stories, over the past couple of weeks. And the quote's, Terry Pratchett, and it is, "No one is finally dead until the ripples they cause in the world die away, until the clock wound up winds down, until the wine she made has finished its ferment, until the crop they planted is harvested. The span of someone's life is only the core of their actual existence." And I just think that that building off of that, one of the best things to do is to continue to do things that they would love, continue to talk about them to people that they never knew, who that person was. My dentist, for instance, now knows a little bit about Matt, because that's just what you do. Right. So, so I think, as certainly as Fate's Wide Wheel continues on, I just want everyone to know, and I don't think this will be hard to hide in any way, shape, or form, that, Matt is definitely present for me in so many ways, because I wouldn't be doing this really without him. And I mentioned this on Quantum Leap podcast. He asked me to write an interstitial for Volume 3 about Fate's Wide Wheel and, being a part of the fandom and that sort of stuff. And the first line is, "There would not be a Fate's Wide Wheel without Matt Dale." But I didn't think he'd actually let me put that in the book. So in parentheses next to it, I wrote, "There would not be a Fate's Wide Wheel without Beyond the Mirror Image," because I just felt like Matt wouldn't want the credit, or as I joked, the responsibility for this show. But I don't think he would have minded if I put that on the book. So
for the transitive property,
right? Yeah. So yeah, I obviously I want to keep talking about him whenever I can, and in this instance, it feels right to do it right now, and I certainly want to reiterate just how much I'm thinking of his family and Sharon and Zach, and also of Albie and Chris and Allison and Hayden over at Quantum Leap podcast, and I know that they're on hiatus right now. Whatever they choose to do, whenever they choose to do it, I will obviously be supporting them any way I possibly can. And continue to, to try to just make this experience one that is collaborative. Someone very close to Matt actually recently reached out to me, or responded to me rather. I had reached out to them, and when Matt apparently told them about Fate's Wide Wheel initially, their comment was, "Oh, so they're like your competition?" And Matt was like, no, I don't see it that way at all. We're all part of the same thing. We're all doing the same thing. And, I certainly want that spirit to live on, for sure. So, whatever QLP is up to, yeah, I will always continue to support them, in whatever's next. And, certainly, they deserve all the time and the space to figure out whatever that is and what that picture looks like going forward. So certainly thinking about them as well. There's not a lot other than what I already stated, of news to report about the show right now. It is still on its hiatus, its winter break. There's no firm return date as of yet. Based off of what I've heard and what I can gather, I imagine they will be done shooting sometime late this month, which is actually a little earlier than I had anticipated, to be honest with you. But I think that's about right. It sounds to me like 9, 10, and possibly 11 are close to being locked already, which means that they're pretty much ready to air. Maybe not 11, maybe 11 might still have a little bit, but 9 and 10 I believe are. And and then 12 I believe is shooting right now, and then I think 13, the finale will shoot, and start shooting in about a week maybe, or less than. So it feels like in a way it's all just happening so fast, in spite of the fact that the strike happened and then they had all this time where nothing was happening, right? And then it just kicked back up, and less than 3 months later they're just about done. So I don't know. I mean, when last we spoke to Dean Georgeris, who of course is the co-showrunner, executive producer, and writer for the show, Dean had mentioned that his hope was late January, early February. I think that's still a possibility, but obviously here we are January 8th and we haven't quite heard anything official yet. Of course, I say that and watch like tomorrow the news will come out and it's like Quantum Leap returns January 25th or whatever. Because that has happened before on this show. So we'll see what happens and what announcements are made. I know some people are already asking about season 3. To be completely frank, I don't anticipate any renewal announcements for a while. I mean, last year was such an outlier with the early renewal date and had so much to do with the potential for the strikes. I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes, more of a standard kind of thing where we don't hear anything until like March, April, May, about a renewal. And I think anyone who's worried, if we haven't heard in the meantime, I don't think there's any cause for concern. I think that the network is a fan of the show. I think the network is behind the show. I think the quality of the show has only continued to improve. The ratings are better this season than they were last season. So I don't think there's any reason for concern. I mean, obviously anything can happen. But yeah, it's all very nebulous right now, frankly, when it comes to, what can be said about what's next, other than the fact that we've got 5 more episodes of the season and they're going to be in production. And I think they're going to be really, really cool. I know hardly anything about them at all. But yeah, it should be a pretty fantastic ride. I think things are definitely we're going to hit the ground running pretty much right away when we come back for episode 9.
I can't wait. And to piggyback on what you said, I imagine that, when the show will come back and if and when there is a renewal announcement, and it doesn't just depend on Quantum Leap's production. It's every production that NBC has, how many episodes other shows have in the can, because coming out of the strike, I imagine NBC's main goal is to program from now through the spring. And so what will allow them to do that? How will their game of Tetris come together so that they can get through, the first quarter here with programming and then get these shows, back into production for the fall. So yeah, I mean, it's a unprecedented time. Like not since 2008 during the last writer's strike has there been kind of this strange shuffling of shows. And yeah, I can't wait for it to come back whenever it is. But I have a feeling, like you, Sam, like maybe there'll be an announcement soon. But I imagine they probably want to have episodes a little further into the spring. And since there's only 5 coming, it might be a little bit of time before we see all these episodes
Yeah.
air.
And I would anticipate, and again, I'm just making stuff up right now, so don't take this as any sort of like behind the scenes info or whatever.
But this is a podcast. That's what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay?
This is the internet. There's no facts here. So I do anticipate that there will likely be some breaks. I doubt that all 5 will air, consecutively. I imagine there'll probably be, a week or 2 break in between episodes. Whether that means we get like 9, 10, 11, and then there's 2 weeks off, and then we get 12 and 13, or if it's like 9, 10 week off,
and
something
that's
like
so
that.
tough. It is hard on ratings because you want people to know when to tune in. And, even if the time of and day of week stay the same, if you have breaks in the schedule, some casual fans might fall off. They might not know what week Quantum Leap is coming back.
Right. And I think it certainly took a toll, frankly, on the classic series, and granted, in that instance, they were also changing days and times, sometimes, but it can take a toll on any show. But we'll see what happens. It's funny because there's not been as much information available about the Peacock numbers as there was last season, and I think some of that was kind of just assumption or supposition, but I believe, again, based off of what little I do know, that the Peacock numbers have still been strong as well, and the streaming numbers are good. So as long as that kind of stuff holds up, I think that again, the future is pretty bright. Internationally, I know that the show it's not airing as much, unfortunately. Over in the UK, for instance, on Paramount Plus, I believe when they got the show initially, they only got like the first 8 episodes, and that's all they had for like 6 months. And then they got the second 8 episodes. They still don't have season 2. So hopefully internationally, the show will start, airing more consistently, and people will be able to have access to the episodes in a manner befitting of Quantum Leap, where time should not have as much of a barrier to people watching.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, that's really about all that I've got right now on Quantum Leap. But this week, I'm very excited because I feel like you and I, JJ, have been able to do some things that I have wanted to do and hinted at about doing on this podcast literally for years. We talked about the Twilight Zone. Yes. Obviously we talked about Doctor Who, which was awesome. Dennis and I had done that before. We had an episode where we talked about Doctor Who, which was a lot of fun. And so the opportunity to talk about that again was great. It's funny because, again, just showing how ever present he is. One of the people I was like, I wanted validation from when we did that episode was Matt. I was like, Matt, we're going to do an episode of Doctor Who. Hopefully we don't cock it all up. Will you, let me know if you think it's all right. And he gave me the thumbs up, which was great.
Right.
So it's super exciting that now, after having done that, we get to talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Yes.
Thank you.
One of my favorite shows, one of your favorite shows, and I'm a huge Star Trek fan, Trekkie Trekker from way back. And Deep Space Nine is, the unsung jewel in the crown of the Trek franchise. So, and the timing's great because this week marks 31 years since the debut of the DS9 premiere, the Emissary, back in 1993. And I felt like, as we were talking about what we wanted to discuss, like, last year, the 30th anniversary, pretty big deal for the show. 31 years. But 31 is sort of a fitting number for a show like Deep Space Nine and the Star Trek franchise, given the sort of clandestine section within Starfleet that is featured in Deep Space Nine and sort of introduced in that show, it being the only Star Trek show that could introduce something like that.
Right.
So, yeah. So it's great to have a reason to talk about the show, and but it's a lot of show. It's 7 seasons. So you and I discussing like what do we want to talk about today, I think that, where we landed was sort of talking about the early years of DS9 also feels appropriate for the anniversary of the show. So I'm excited to delve into early DS9, which, Star Trek shows have somewhat of a reputation of being slow starters, say for the original series. And, it took TNG, a couple of years to sort of find its footing and get out of the original series shadow. And obviously Voyager, a lot of people felt like Voyager didn't really hit its stride until like the end of the third season when they introduced Seven of Nine and got into a lot of the Bourque storylines. DS9 has a similar reputation in some circles, but I guess my thesis for our discussion is that is not a well-earned sort of belief. I feel like DS9 is one of the strongest series from the start in terms of what it is and the storytelling and the world building and the characters. And I'm curious, if you have any thoughts on that, Sam. A lot of people running around saying the show didn't get good until Sisko shaved his head.
Right. Till it grew its goatee.
Yes. He had to have his makeover.
No, I'm really glad that you bring that up. And I think one of the first questions that was kind of on my mind, and really it's on my mind anytime, we're thinking about maybe branching out and talking about something else. It's why DS9, right? Because I think we're both big Star Trek fans. We both enjoy all iterations of Star Trek. And I think that the number one thing to make clear before we talk too much about DS9 and heap all the superlatives on it is that I love all of Star Trek. I genuinely do. But DS9 is definitely my favorite. And I think that the why behind that and the why talk about DS9 as opposed to the original series, our Next Generation, go in some sort of chronological order on this journey or whatever, is because for me, DS9 was probably the show that it spoke to me the most. And part of that has to do with, when I saw it. I was 11 years old when the premiere aired, and I was 17, 18 when it went off the air. It was right before I turned 18, I think. Or it might have even been like it wasn't on my 18th birthday. It was that weekend though. I think it was that weekend, because I remember watching What You Leave Behind. Yeah, the finale. Wow. Anyway, so for me, I agree with your assessment, and I think that those first couple of seasons get lumped into that sort of, Trekkian curse, if you will, where it takes a while for them to find their footing, unfairly. And I think it's because it's easy to do that. And because, quite frankly, the worst episodes, if I may be so bold to even use that term, I don't really like doing that as much these days. But the episodes that I certainly find the least appealing are certainly in the first two seasons.
Sure.
I think the show does get a lot stronger in seasons 3 and 4, and 5, 6, and 7 are some of the gold standard of all of Trek, as far as I'm concerned. So it's easy to look at those first two seasons and say like, yeah, but it has those episodes, and it's like, sure, but overall there's so many quality episodes. And I think that one of the things that stands out to me is that Emissary may very well be the finest introduction that any Trek series has ever had. I certainly think it's better than Encounter at Farpoint. I certainly think it's better than Caretaker, and I think it's better than Broken Bow, for Enterprise. I think once you start to get into kind of like the Discovery era of Star Trek, it gets a little harder maybe to make comparisons, because I think surprisingly enough, in some ways, the storytelling, the way that the stories are told in DS9 compared to some of the stuff that we see now from like Discovery or Strange New Worlds, there's actually, I feel like there's more connective tissue to DS9 than there is to Next Generation or Voyager or the original series. Even Picard season 3, in my opinion, has more connective tissue in its storytelling and the type of stories it's telling, the way it's telling the stories, if not the actual story that's being told, to DS9 than it does to the Next Generation.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the Emissary in particular, one of the reasons why it's so successful to me, and why those first couple of seasons are successful to me, is I think more than just about any other Trek series, everyone showed up on day one with an idea, a very formal idea of who these people were, what they wanted, where we were, when we were, what came before, in a way that we had never seen before on Star Trek. Certainly not in the original series or Next Generation. You know, those characters, I mean, you can easily make the argument that those characters did not really become the characters that we know and love until like season 3, for the most part. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some good episodes in seasons 1 and 2, because of course there are.
Absolutely.
But you watch Emissary, and it's clear Avery Brooks knows who Benjamin Sisko is, you know, and who he's going to be. And part of that, of course, is due to the writers as well, you know, and the way that he's written. But the other brilliant thing about Emissary, in my opinion, and it's and this is kind of just the idea of the why of DS9. I'm not talking specifically about Emissary necessarily, but is it starts kind of in the middle of the story. Like DS9, the station itself, the eponymous, you know, station, Terok Nor, it has a history. Kira has a history. Odo has a history. Dax has a history. Sisko clearly has a history, you know, and Quark has a history. Like these characters, O'Brien, I mean, everyone has a past, and they all have something in that past that is, you know, worth recovering from in a way, which is also incredibly engaging. And again, it's not something that we'd really ever seen before from Trek. So I think that that's one of the reasons why DS9 for me has that immediate pull, is because it is unlike anything that had come before. In a lot of ways, it's unlike most of what's come since.
Sure.
And once they really got into the serialized storytelling later in the show, you started to realize the importance of so much of the groundwork that was laid early on in the first 2 seasons.
Right. And I think, you know, bringing up the serialized storytelling and talking about the connective tissue with the newer, you know, streaming Trek series. I mean, back in the 90s when the show aired, I mean, serialized storytelling was a novelty in TV. And that sort of became the what DS9 was known for at that time. The fact that they have all these multi-part stories, and they keep bringing back these recurring characters again and again and again. And it's not that TNG didn't have recurring characters. It's just that they tended to only pop up once a season, and there wasn't necessarily an arc for them. It was just sort of like, let's stop in and let's see what Lwaxana's up to this season. Let's have a visit from Q and let's see what's going on there. But, you know, in this show, you know, you're building from episode to episode. And so I think that in and of itself is a reason to see more connections to modern Trek through DS9 than some of the other shows of that era. And I think that, you know, in talking about the pilot, you watch that pilot and, you know, it's a really smartly made episode, because, you know, it takes advantage of the groundwork that Star Trek The Next Generation had to shoulder. Because, you know, this was a spinoff, The Next Generation, of a show that had gone off the air, you know, almost 20 years prior. And had only been living in syndication and on movie screens since then, in a very different format than what they were trying to do on TV. So they had to reintroduce the entire world. They had to reintroduce Starfleet and the Federation and Klingons and Romulans, and then also introduce all of these new species, Ferengis and Cardassians and Bajorans, which they all did on The Next Generation. And so what DS9 did is it took all of those facets that The Next Generation had spent the last 5 years either reintroducing or building from scratch, and it sort of set up the entire chessboard for this show, where if you were a Star Trek fan who had been following the franchise either from the beginning or from the start of The Next Generation, you already had all the language. To say nothing of the fact that DS9's opening takes place during what's considered the greatest episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, and builds off of that in a very unexpected way, taking Jean-Luc Picard, the hero of this show, the hero of the franchise, and turning him into an antagonist for our new main character. It's pretty brilliant, and it's pretty gutsy on part of, you know, Michael Piller and the other DS9 folks to sort of come out swinging that way and
Yeah.
set Jean-Luc Picard up as kind of a villain in that pilot.
Well, and it's funny because here we are, of course, 31 years later, 30 years later, obviously, when this aired, but 30 years later, it was still worth revisiting because in in season 3 of Picard, you have the wonderful, incredible character of Liam Shaw, who bears some of the same wounds that Cisco had, and
Right.
and has that amazing scene with Picard in the bar, the holodeck bar, and like the fact that event, that singular event, Wolf 359, resonates so far into the future here with Star Trek, that it was even capitalized just a few years after the fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was such a brilliant idea to tie things into that moment and to tie Cisco, directly into that moment. And the show, it's something that I've always wanted to write about. And I think that a few years ago, I kind of took my hand at starting to write about Emissary. And, of course, the very first thing that I wrote about is that including that moment is the first stroke of genius, true genius in DS9. That callback and the establishment of Cisco as a family man in the midst of this absolute, horror and destruction, the loss that he faces, his commitment to try to save his wife, the idea that he and his son watch the destruction of that ship. Jake, I think, is actually unconscious at the time, but it was such a brilliant move, and I think set the tone so wonderfully for so much of what followed. And one of the cool things too about Cisco, the character, what it did is it sets Cisco apart in a way that we'd not seen happen very often, certainly not with our main character, because whereas Kirk and Picard would certainly, buck at authority on occasion and challenge the system, it sets Cisco kind of literally like on the opposite side, right? Like he's seen how bad it can get in a way that, arguably Kirk and Picard maybe never did. And I think the way that he challenges authority is very different from the way that Kirk or Picard ever did.
Right. And I think, and I think we're getting into all the things that we love about the show, which, it's strange talking about DS9 in the Star Trek community, I think, sometimes, because there tends to be this natural urge to compare it to the other shows. And, if you're a fan of DS9, sometimes you're comparing some of the negative aspects of the other shows to the positive aspects of DS9.
Sure.
And if you're not as big of a DS9 fan, it's easy to do the opposite. But I do think of the Venn diagram of DS9 and TNG and Voyager, there's a lot of shared space. But
Absolutely.
I think that the differences are so glaring that sometimes it can be hard to focus on that. These stories take place in the same world. They involve some of the same characters. The genius of bringing a recurring character like O'Brien into the main cast of the show, again, just to have this connective tissue. They had planned on bringing over Michelle Forbes if she was up for a regular role in the Kira role, which didn't end up working out, but was still a huge positive for the show because we get Kira Nerys and Nana Visitor, her incredible performance. But the premise of the show is just different, and I think that's where that happens. Whereas, Gene Roddenberry had sold Star Trek to Desilu and NBC as like wagon train to the stars. They're going from outpost town to outpost town, and they have to deal with all these different situations. And DS9's the outpost town, and it's
Gunsmoke.
It's the new sheriff coming into town, getting the lay of the land and laying down the law and dealing with whatever's coming into his town. And in so many ways, you talk about the bucking authority, that's a tougher assignment. And especially, Kirk and Picard, they worked out into the frontier, and there are a number of episodes where Kirk's like, well, we need to, send and ask permission to Starfleet whether I can do this. And they're like, they can't get back to us for 5 days. And it's like, well, in that time, I'm going to go ahead and destroy the society and teach them how I think it should run. So you had moments like that. And then, of course, at the end, it's like, Captain, the message came in and they said, whatever you want to do is great. He's like,
right.
Okay, good.
Right.
But for Cisco, it was either him feeling abandoned, kind of in this far off outpost. They didn't have the same kind of resources that a flagship would have, or feeling very oppressed by the bureaucracy that was sort of crushing him on all sides.
Well, and one of the things to spring off of what you're saying too about the station that I love about seeing in an emissary, and it carries through at various points through the course of the series, is it's in disrepair. It's busted. It's broken down. They don't know what works or what doesn't work. Yeah, and it's and we again, we'd never really seen anything like that before, and rightfully so in some ways. I mean, clearly in the original series, like the Enterprise had to look like the greatest thing you'd ever seen, of course. In Next Generation, like, again, you want the Enterprise, it's your hero ship, it's got to just be perfect, right? We can blow parts of it up and we can do this and we can do that, but it'll be fine next week, sort of deal. Whereas with Deep Space Nine, we come into it, the first time Cisco walks through, it's like things are like falling down, sparks are shooting off. It's not only is it not a clean, beautiful space, but it's also not a safe space. We get that idea right off the bat. And I think that, setting up that tension and putting us on edge in that way is also an incredibly smart idea, because one of the challenges of setting it on a space station as opposed to putting it on a starship is that you don't get to go find new challenges or new dangers each week, right? Those dangers have to already kind of exist or come to you. And right. I think the wonderful thing that the first couple of seasons did is they struck this neat little balance between kind of problems existing on the station and problems finding their way to the station. I think more often than not, they went with the latter. They went with, something comes to the station and brings trouble. But the brilliance of the show is, as the show matured and as the show went on, they found a way to have those problems existing, like just on the station or around the station in the world they were in, without having to like bring in a monster of the week or whatever, basically. And I just always thought that was really really smart. Although again, it was really interesting in the first couple of seasons to see the way that they would, bring trouble to town, if you will.
Right. And the wormhole was a way for them to get off the station and sort of have those kind of typical Star Trek adventures, or that's where some of these, problems or aliens are coming from. But a lot of it is just dynamics on the space station, which is pretty great. And I think that's where a lot of episodes in the first couple of seasons shine, when they're playing with those dynamics on the station. And I think we're going to talk about what some of our favorite episodes are in the first couple of seasons, but I'm interested to see where the two of us land in terms of that stuff. I do want to mention before we go any further, because we're going to talk about some merch stuff that we like that from this era of the show, but I do want to mention to folks who are watching or listening that we've got some merch to announce as well, which we're going to debut here at the end of this episode.
I totally dropped the ball on mentioning that earlier.
No, it's okay. I'm just thinking, something that has been really great, Sam inviting me to guest on the show on a regular basis here, is that it gives me the opportunity to create episode artwork for Fate's Wide Wheel. Inspired by whatever we're discussing. And so since, we decided, let's talk about DS9 for the anniversary, I've been able to put together a piece to celebrate this episode of Fate's Wide Wheel, and then, of course, to celebrate DS9 itself. And we'll debut that at the end of the episode, if that sounds good, Sam. We'll show people what it is. And but I also, you and I are both collectors of stuff, and I think have been for a long time. So I have a lot of Star Trek merch that I've had from over the years that I love. And I'm sure that you've got some as well. But I wanted to show you something since we're talking about Emissary so much.
Yeah.
I will show you when I watch Emissary. Forget your VHS. Forget your DVD.
Boy.
I've got my official Laserdisc copy of the premiere.
Wow. That's something else.
It's fun. It's and I've got the whole first season here on Laserdisc.
Wow. Amazing.
What's fun is, and what's both cool and kind of unfortunate is that because DS9 was shot on film, but it was edited and finalized on video.
Yeah.
The DVDs tend to have a lot of artifacts from digitizing, as do the streaming versions that are on Paramount Plus and other platforms. So, watching it on VHS doesn't suffer from that, but it also doesn't suffer from that on Laserdisc. And Laserdisc is actually a little higher quality than VHS. Mm-hmm. So technically, when you're watching the show on Laserdisc, it's kind of the best quality that you can see it in right now.
Yeah.
Which is ironic. So anytime, this is sort of my go-to these days when I want to watch an episode of DS9 from the early seasons.
I will say, surprisingly enough, because I rewatched Emissary the other night. I was going to try and watch some more, but it's just been so busy around here. But I rewatched Emissary the other night, and I was surprised. The Paramount Plus version of Emissary, I don't think they've done anything to it. Unfortunately, they've put no money into DS9 at all over the past decade and a half or whatever. Yeah. But I can say without a doubt that it looks better than the last time I watched it on Amazon Prime, and definitely better than when I used to watch it on Netflix. I don't know why. Okay. I don't know what there maybe if it's just higher encoding or whatever the case might be. The bit rate and streaming is a little bit better than it used to be. Whatever they've done, it didn't have the same artifacting problems that you're talking about. It didn't have the same. It's hard to mention, but a lot of it also comes down to lighting. Sometimes I feel like that the way that the show is lit, in particular, the watching it on Netflix back in the day, I was just like, my gosh, this is like the Stone Age. It just doesn't look, especially with next gen getting its remaster and with the original series getting its remaster. It's like you watch those episodes now and you're just sort of like, wow, this is incredible. Yeah. And so unfortunately with DS9, it's just not quite the case. But for whatever reason and for whatever it's worth, I will say that on Paramount Plus, I do think the series looks better on streaming than I've seen it before.
Well, I'm going to check that out and see, because I'm very curious. Maybe somebody's got a Laserdisc over there at Paramount Plus.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Anytime somebody goes to stream Emissary, we got another stream. They run over and they pop the Laserdisc in. Just feed it to your TV.
That speaks. That without a doubt, we kind of talked about this off mic. That speaks to the treatment, I think, of DS9 just in general as being sort of the outlier when it comes to Trek and not getting, what other shows have gotten. Because I could totally, could you imagine all the other Treks, right? It's it's the highest tech. It's you press the button, it streams automatically. But this is some sort of Simpsons Futurama thing where it's literally like a mouse spinning on a wheel just to keep the laser disc going, and then there's that intern that has to walk in and flip over the platter when it's time to go to the next episode, and
yes,
it's like nobody's watching DS9. It won't matter. But yeah, I think that those are incredible. I have the first 4 seasons on DVD. I actually don't have the complete series on DVD, which is a shock.
What?
Part of it is because I was buying it on DVD, and then I kind of stopped because I was in school and I didn't have a lot of money. And then when I had the opportunity to buy the rest of the seasons, because I was just getting them individually, I stopped because I was like, well, it'll probably come out on Blu-ray, because this is before I knew anything, right?
Right.
And so I kind of stopped buying it. And then, of course, I started reading, and I was just sort of and so almost almost in protest. There was a
Sweet,
part of me that's
naive
like,
Sam.
I'm not, yeah, right. It's like, I am not buying this on DVD until, they show some respect. I will say the special features on the DVDs are actually very well done. There's some really
so
nice
great.
interviews. Now I will say that if you've never seen the show before, save watching any of the special features until you've watched the whole show, even on like the season one, because there's literally stuff in the season one interviews that spoil like what happens like 4 or 5 seasons down the road. But I do, however, I have a complete set of the numbered DS9 novels. Of course, started with Emissary. The rest of them are over on the bookshelf over there. I have most of the relaunch novels. Actually, I have all of the relaunch novels that they did, because one of the cool things about DS9 is before they did this with any of the other series, even Next Gen, they did like an official relaunch of the series to continue on where the series basically left off in novel form. And it was fairly self-contained, really focused on DS9. You had a little bit of crossover, like the first couple of novels. I think Picard and like the Enterprise were in a little bit, because the new captain of the station was like on the Enterprise for a mission or something, and they took him to DS9. Ro Laren, who you mentioned earlier, Michelle Forbes' character, returned to the station, which was really cool. Just lots of great stuff, picking up on some of the threads and some of the stuff left over from the end of the series. So I have all of those up to the point where the relaunch kind of started to be merged into the general novel range wide relaunch that they were doing with all the series. And I feel like it was funny because in the same way that we talk about DS9 kind of getting relegated to the discount bin a lot of times, it kind of happened again, whereas certain characters like Ezri Dax and Bashir got followed up on and used quite a bit. For the most part, DS9 was kind of like the outlier, and they finally got back to it again towards the end of the novel range. But then unfortunately, for better or worse, when Paramount Plus decided to do the new series, they basically blew up the novel continuity and literally had like this 3-volume book where like the universe ends, and so now we can tell no more stories in that universe. And I never understood. I was like, just take a break.
Well,
you don't have to end it.
It's very similar to what happened to Star Wars when they started to make the sequels. They didn't destroy the extended universe or the Legends universe, whatever they're calling it these days. But yeah, it's tough. A lot of really great authors put a lot of heart and soul into continuing all those stories.
And there's some brilliant stories that got told. I mean, the numbered novels, much like the next generation numbered novels are fairly hit or miss, I think. Although I will say that, DS9, I think for the most part, fared pretty well compared to like next gen and the original series. The original series has some brilliant ones and some real
Absolutely.
Next
I read a lot of those as a kid.
Yeah. I feel like next gen, though, honestly, a lot of the numbered novels are just kind of mediocre. There's some good ones along the way for sure, but a lot of them are just kind of not, they don't measure up in my opinion. The great thing about DS9 is some of the non-numbered novels. They did a Lost Era series called Terok Nor, which was about basically the Cardassian Bajoran conflict, and from the beginning all the way up until like a week before Cisco arrives on DS9, and it was really well done. All 3 books I thought were great. There was a trilogy called Millennium, which was sort of an alternate universe kind of thing, which was done very, very well. So DS9 in book form, did pretty well in my opinion. But I've always been, a fan of that sort of stuff. Something else, this is the first Star Trek magazine I ever owned. This is the Deep Space Nine Volume 3, the 3rd issue. Odo being on the cover. Odo was my first favorite character.
Yeah.
I was always
that's
an
a good
Odo
one.
fan.
Yeah.
I picked this up at one point, so this is the first issue, and I have the whole set now of the magazines that came out at the time. I do not, believe it or not, have a whole set of these, but here's the first comic book that they ever did. I know this
cool.
should be bagged
is
and
that,
board.
My feed's a little pixelated. Which publisher is that? When it was under Marvel or
no? This is when it was under Malibu.
Malibu, yes.
Yeah, Malibu Publishing
series.
Did it.
I want to shout
the
out.
back cover has an ad for Super Nintendo joystick.
I want to shout out while we're on the topic of comics.
Yeah.
A comic book that I work on for IDW,
yes,
which is the Star Trek ongoing series.
Yeah.
Is a is a really great continuation of all of that era of Star Trek, but specifically DS9 because the main character is Ben Sisko, returning from the void, as it were, with the Prophets. So if you're a Star Trek fan and you're looking for further adventures of Ben Sisko, there he is. I can live with it. If you're looking for further adventures with Sisko, but not just him, the series features Data and Beverly Crusher and Scotty, all in an era between Insurrection and Nemesis is the timeline. It's a great ongoing series. The writers are great. Jackson Collin, and always great art in that. And I've been fortunate enough to do a bunch of covers for that series and for the sister series Defiant, which features Worf. So if you're looking for expanded Star Trek stuff, check out the IDW series that are running now.
Yeah, I've read the first few issues and I really enjoyed it. And I think, JJ, I think I mentioned this before, but you did like this interlocking stained glass window art.
That hasn't been released. It hasn't been announced yet.
Oh, no. I have to cut that, don't I?
But it's okay. It's okay to tease it. But you can't see it.
All right. It's okay I said that? I don't have to cut that out? I don't have to edit that?
No, you're okay.
Okay.
Get a little tease there.
Well, there you go.
I just sort of teased it at the end of the year.
Okay.
Because they were pretty happy with the spread. But yeah, there's a 6-issue spread coming in 2024. So keep an eye on that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I do enjoy the series quite a bit. I need to get all the way caught up because I've only read the first few issues. But the Making of DS9 book, I always loved the books, especially I think in the late 80s through mid 90s or so, even the late. I mean, there's about a decade or so stretch there where they were just producing some fantastic books in general, like whether it was the technical manuals or behind the scenes books or whatnot. There was always just some really, really great information on the show, on the lore of the show, the costumes, the sets, etc. And DS9 was no exception. The Making of DS9 book is beautiful, has some incredible sketches and all sorts of behind the scenes stuff.
Very cool.
They also released what is, for my money, one of the finest Star Trek books like ever, which is the Deep Space Nine Companion. And my copy, unfortunately, it's not nearby, but it's very hard to find now, unfortunately. Well, I don't know if that's hard to find. It is hard to find for a good price. Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is. You can get lucky. I got lucky with mine. I did not buy it when it first came out. And I got very lucky with mine. I was able to get it for like $25, I think, on eBay. And they'll pop up every once in a while there. But in general, if you go and you look for it right now, you're probably going to see most of them are like $100, $150, $200 or whatever. I would encourage you not to pay that. Just, if you want it and you're listening to this, set an alert. Pay attention. You'll be able to get it for a good deal at some point. The book is so good, and it is pretty reverential of the series, which I think it should be in a way. I mean, it's about Deep Space Nine, right? But the great thing is it does not shy away from some of the turmoil. Even in the early days of the show, all the way up until the latter days of the show, and the fact that there were a lot of people that worked on that show and within that show, and Ron Moore and Ira Stephen Bear, like, have all been kind of on the record of saying this, is that people didn't really get the show, and so because they didn't get it, they were more willing to kind of just push it to the side, and pour the money into those final few seasons of Next Gen, or pour the money into Voyager, or start planning Enterprise, and all this sort of stuff. And so it was kind of like DS9 in a lot of ways, it was just sort of treated like, pardon the expression, that redheaded stepchild. And
by people, you're referring to the higher ups, not the folks who are producing the show day to day, but you've got sort of these overarching figures in the Trek franchise at that time. And
I will say that it's fascinating to me because I feel like Rick Berman early on, I don't know. He was certainly not opposed to the idea of the show, but I think as the show went on, he was one of those people that didn't really get it. And yet now, if you listen to interviews, he appraises the show in a very different light, which is interesting to me because a lot of people kind of, talk about Berman and Piller as being kind of the guys that didn't get the show, didn't understand the show, did not treat the show well, did not, they weren't necessarily as effusive with their praise of the cast and the crew as they were with other iterations of Trek.
And of course, they're
And if you
credited
look
as
at,
creators of the show,
yeah,
ironically.
exactly. Yeah. And I do actually think that I don't know if it was Berman's idea necessarily, but I do think that he approved. Well, I mean, he kind of had to, I think, approve of the idea of it being a space station setting, of doing kind of the, like, instead of Wagon Train to the Stars, this is going to be Gunsmoke, and it's going to be,
Right.
our version of that or whatever. But yeah, it is interesting to hear him talk about the show now. Gates McFadden narrated / hosted this sort of Star Trek retrospective show that was on Amazon Prime that I watched recently. And it was just fascinating because as I watched him talk about DS9, I was just like, wait a minute. That's not what you said, like, or what you were quoted as saying like 10 years ago. Like,
Right.
where is this coming
pull
from?
up the source.
yeah. But anyway, all that said, I mean, I do think that the fans of the show, in my mind, are among the most passionate of Trek fans in a lot of ways, because I think that to love DS9, you have to love Star Trek. I don't think that there are fans that are only fans of DS9. You know what I mean? I think there might be fans
because of the premise of the show. It's based on the bones of this world, and
right.
It introduces a lot of things in the beginning, but it does take a lot of information for granted when you're jumping into the story, because it's starting in the middle of a conflict that you've seen play out in another show.
Right.
And so it was a show sort of meant for fans of Star Trek: The Next Generation and Star Trek in general. And so, and it was a big deal. Yeah.
And I think that's certainly, I'll be brief, but my journey to that premiere, I mean, I watched it, it was in syndication, so it wasn't the same like time and place everywhere, but I watched it when it first aired. And the reason why I did is because I had become a fan. My grandfather was always watching Next Gen, and I'd seen some original series here and there. But I became a fan of the Next Generation during, like basically Best of Both Worlds, in through season 4 and 5, and I loved all the Klingon stuff. Worf was like my favorite character. I was sold on all of that, and then of course the Bajoran stuff in Row and the Cardassians, I was interested enough. And of course, I knew that DS9 was coming. And the last episodes, and I don't think I actually saw the second episode, believe it or not, but I remember watching Chain of Command Part 1 when it initially aired. Mm-hmm. And I loved it. I mean, I still think that like that, the intro to the episode is really great. I think that there's so much great stuff in it. So I kind of, I knew the Cardassians, I knew the Bajorans. I had a huge crush on Ro when I was a little kid. And then of course, I watched DS9, and as a kid, I didn't really get Emissary in a lot of ways. Like some of the stuff that I appreciate about it now, I think just kind of went over my head a bit. Certainly a lot of the Prophets stuff, and when
linear. Yes.
Cisco. Yeah, exactly. But now watching it, like watching it the other night, and the talks about time and mortality and, all this sort of stuff that he's having with the Prophets, it's just like, man, this is really heady stuff, and it's really good. It's very well done. I love Cisco's approach to it all, the way that he's able to kind of figure it out, his emotional investment in it, obviously, because, they're appearing as Jennifer at times. And, it's just really fascinating to see now. But as a kid, I mean, the idea of this space station, this conflict, there was something about the Bajorans, even to this day. I just love that race. I just do. I don't know why. There's just something about them that appeals to me so much. I think, whether it's the oppression and breaking free from that and having to rebuild, and their spirituality, and I can't explain it exactly, but I love them. And then of course there was Odo. And as soon as I saw Odo, and as soon as they did the first changeling trick, and I was just like, all right, I'm in, and I just loved Odo's story. And I think as a youngster growing up, I identified, with like Spock and with Worf and with Odo, because they were kind of outsiders and they were kind of misunderstood and they didn't feel comfortable in other places. And that's how I felt a lot of times. And so there was something that spoke to me about that. And then of course, as I continued watching the show, by the end of it, it's like, I loved everybody, I was invested in everybody. But I think that there was something so appealing about it right from the get-go to me. And I tried to keep up on it and watch it, as it aired as often as I could. And if I missed one, I had a buddy of mine who would like tape all of them. So I'd try to borrow his VHS or something like that, just so I could kind of like stay on top of it. And I remember I missed the introduction of the Defiant, and my buddy Brian, which if by some chance he happens to be listening, hi Brian. And my buddy Brian was like, did you see the Defiant? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he's like,
You're like, yeah, I saw that episode of the original series.
Yeah, right. Yes, exactly.
Napoleon Webb. What about it?
And it just like, it blew our minds at the time. We're like, wait a minute. It's got a cloak. Wait, it doesn't look like all the, oh my God, this ship is the coolest ship ever.
Right.
Now, before we proceed to kind of talk about our favorite episodes of the first two seasons, I want to ask you one question. Sure. It's kind of the invisible elephant in the room. And believe it or not, Matt and I talked about this on our episode when we chatted about Babylon 5.
Yes, yeah.
So, just a quick primer for anyone who might not necessarily know, and then I want to get your thoughts on this, JJ, is that when J. Michael Straczynski was first pitching Babylon 5, the beloved sci-fi highly serialized television show set on a space station with a lot of spirituality involved in it as well. One of the networks, of course, studios that he went to rather, was Paramount. And the idea being is that Paramount was already kind of, and had been for a long time, trying to start its own network. This is pre-UPN. This is still when everything was kind of in syndication. But he goes to Paramount, and the idea is like, hey, you could hang your hat on this. Here's the series Bible. Basically just hands them the Bible of the show, and they reject it. And then pretty much parallel to production of Babylon 5, all of a sudden there's Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Before I go any further, JJ, your thoughts?
Well, yes, we've all heard the tale, and there's a lot of conjecture. And one side will say, well, clearly some studio executive read this thing, and whether meaning to or not, whispered in somebody's ear, and they whispered in somebody's ear, and we end up with a Star Trek show with a similar premise. And then other people on the other side will say, no, Deep Space Nine was already sort of in the works, and it was just this confluence of coincidence. My thoughts, having no idea what went down, if anything, is that there are a lot of parallels between the shows in terms of the setting and in terms of dealing with alien races trying to find a way to coexist. And for me, I think the thing that sets the two shows apart the most, especially early on, is one of the most important things about the shows, which are the characters. You talk about, you watch Emissary when you're young, and you focus on, like, oh, this guy, and he's coming out to this place, and look at all this weird stuff and all these things. But, the Emissary pilot of DS9, it's a show about a widower and a father. And that's so central to the premise of the pilot and to the premise of the entire show. And that's not what Babylon 5 is about. Like that, that's not a part of that story. And for me, that's the idea that sort of sets those two things apart. I love both of the shows, is what I'll say.
Yes.
I do think, from a premise perspective, there's a lot. There's a lot of things, especially early on, that sort of connect, and then you get into sort of this overarching evil coming from the outside, and you have that obviously playing into the serialized nature later in Deep Space Nine in a big way. But if there was some whispering happening in the background, if some executive is saying, to somebody, said, what if we set it on a space station? It's like, oh, well, that's an interesting idea. I don't know. I'm just glad that both of these exceptional shows exist, one within the Star Trek universe and one in its wholly
I think one of the things,
own unique universe as well. So whatever happened, I'm glad. That'd
Right.
be my thought on that.
Well, no, I see. I completely agree with you. And I think that one of the things that's fascinating to me is that it's very easy to focus on the similarities because there are similarities, undoubtedly, that go
Absolutely.
far, they go beyond just a space station, right? I mean, even the idea that Cisco is special in some way,
Sure.
right? To these people, it's the very same way that Sinclair and then Sheridan were special
Right.
to the Mimbar, that it's a
Right.
very similar setup. Even the idea that Cisco was party to this cataclysmic wartime event that occurred, for his people, basically, it's the same. It is a very similar setup to what Sinclair had in Babylon 5. I think that when you start to look at the differences, however, is when you start to really see the true genius of each show and the way that the shows are able to kind of separate themselves from one another for all the similarities that exist. And I think that Straczynski would admit that in a lot of ways, Babylon 5 is standing on the shoulder of Star Trek in some ways. Like, there was other influences, obviously. I mean, Lord of the Rings is a huge influence to Babylon 5,
Yeah.
no matter what anybody tries to say. But Trek was obviously influential. And Straczynski often talks about the fact that when he got Majel Barrett to come on the show, it felt like a huge kind of stamp of approval. It's like, well, if she's going to come on the show, and even in the fandom at the time, because I can remember back on like the message boards and usernets and all that sort of stuff, like even at the time, fans were just sort of like, oh, well, if she's coming on the show, then it must mean that there's no real fight here, right? Like, it wasn't competition,
Right.
And so I think that, again, that once you start to recognize and appreciate the differences, it really, again, starts to expose how each show is unique and kind of a piece of its own, television sci-fi genius on its own. But that said, I think that there are definitely some similarities, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if at some point in time somebody somewhere along the line said, hey, that's a good idea, why don't we use it?
Yeah. I don't, and if that did happen, I don't think anybody involved directly in necessarily the making of Deep Space Nine was aware of that. But I feel like the way that these systems work is there's a lot of producers in the middle and people reading scripts, and there's feedback and things like that, and some of that might have made its way. Yeah.
And the other thing is too, and I've heard this before, and Straczynski said it. I think Ron Moore has said it before. At the time they were making these shows, they didn't have too much time to pay attention to what the other person was doing. It wasn't like Straczynski was like in his office saying like, "Oh, you better find out what those bastards at Paramount are doing." And it wasn't like Ira Stephen Bear or whatever was like, "Oh, what's Straczynski up to?" It was
there's no internet. There's no internet as we know.
Right. Yeah. But I am always fascinated by it. I do think it's interesting, and I think that there are certain times when I watch DS9 and I do see a similar thread, or I see something pop up, and I'm just sort of like, I think maybe they did that better, which is a completely subjective thing. I mean, I love Babylon 5. I absolutely love it. But, I mean, heck, I talked about Babylon 5 on this show before I got to DS9. So
there you go.
Don't come at me, B5 fans. I love it. Can
I ask you one question regarding
Please.
Babylon 5 versus Star Trek? Walter Koenig, better on Star Trek or Babylon 5?
Babylon 5.
Yes. Yeah. And I think you'd probably say that too.
Bester is such a great character.
So good. If you're a Star Trek fan and you haven't seen Babylon 5, check it out. If for nothing else, to see the Walter Koenig's career-defining performance as the recurring character, Bester, who's the head of the Psi Corps. Is that?
Yep. Yeah, Psi Corps.
Head of the Psi Corps. So
he's a Psi
so
cop.
Good.
Yeah,
he's so good. And I say this about the original series a lot. Like, they're the featured cast. Everyone below DeForest Kelley on the bill. They didn't always get opportunities to shine in those original series episodes. But I would say, for me, one of the best episodes featuring supporting cast of the original series is Mirror Mirror, certainly for George Takei.
Yeah.
Because he gets to stretch and he plays this mirror version of Sulu, and Nichelle Nichols. That's one of her best episodes of the series, because she is playing Uhura, playing the mirror version. And so they just have more to work with. And I feel like for Walter Koenig, the scripts on B5 just just gave him room to play and to
Absolutely.
really do his thing and just really show his chops, which is something that didn't always get to happen on Star Trek, unfortunately.
Yeah. And that's one of the things too, where DS9, I think, succeeds where other Trek shows did not always have that opportunity. Even Next Gen, honestly, when you really look at it, especially when you look at like characters like Troy and Crusher, in particular, is that everyone on this show gets their due. And probably even more appropriate than any iteration of Trek, except for maybe some of the modern day Treks, which I do think that they've really, really got some incredible actors working on. Every actor's up to the challenge.
Yep.
Which, being completely fair, completely honest, for me personally, if I'm looking at it, I can't say that necessarily all the time about the other casts of, the original series, Next Gen, Voyager, and Enterprise. But anyway, so let's talk about the opportunities that these people had to tell some really great stories and hit on season 1 real quick. First of all, I want to mention a website that I have used for years and years and years and years, and literally is kind of my go-to for any time I'm interested in kind of, getting someone else's thoughts on Star Trek and, what they're thinking of the show. I just absolutely love there's this website, Jammers Reviews, it's all one word, jammersreviews.com, and I don't always agree with what he says, but I've always appreciated the time and in his writing, and it's succinct, it's easily digestible in a way, but the really wonderful thing is that I feel like when it comes to DS9 in particular, I do find myself agreeing with him more often than not. And for what it's worth, he does rate Emissary the highest of any premiere of any iteration of Trek. And that includes like all the way up to Strange New Worlds. It gets 3.5 out of 4 stars. Every other premiere episode gets 3 stars or less. So, right off the bat, I have to give him a shout because he gets it. And I think, starting with Emissary as our starting point, it's just such a great episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I have in my hand another piece of merch that I've had for a while, which is another book, which is Captain's Logs Supplemental. And if you're watching, I'm holding it up here. And this is by Ed Gross and Mark Altman, who've written a ton of genre stuff and specifically Star Trek nonfiction stuff. So this is a supplement to the larger Captain's Logs, which covered Star Trek, the original series, the TOS films, and the Next Generation, and had some brief chapters on early DS9 and the premiere of Voyager. But this supplemental volume covers the first 4 years of DS9, the first 2 years of Voyager, and the making of Star Trek 8, as it's called in this book. A chapter called Making Contact, to date the book for everybody.
Right. Wow.
So I'm going to flip, as we're talking about the first couple of seasons and pointing out some of our favorite episodes, I'll flip around here because there's some information about the episodes as well. So am I to imagine that you would rank, if you had to rank top 3 in season 1 of DS9, Emissary would be in that count?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that it's an easy one, but quite frankly, you can't talk about the early seasons of DS9 without mentioning it. I think it's one of the finest episodes of DS9 ever, and I think it's one of the finest episodes of Trek ever, and that's Duet, which is the second to the last episode of season 1. So Duet would definitely make the list. I do think Emissary does. It's hard because there are so many others that I really enjoy as well. In the Hands of the Prophets, I love Battle Lines, Vortex, Dax. I think Dax is a phenomenal episode for so many reasons.
You're just naming all the episodes now, Sam. You're just naming all the episodes in the season.
Well, that's the thing, right? Though that's the amazing thing about the first season of DS9. When anyone tries to say that DS9, first season was rough, or they didn't really hit their stride until later or whatever, I can immediately, off the top of my head, without having to look at anything, I can immediately say Emissary, Past Prologue, Man Alone, Captive Pursuit, Dax, In the Hands of the Prophets, Duet. Like right off the bat, I can name those episodes. Battle Lines, Vortex. I'm naming like half the season already, and it's just sort of like, what are you talking about? The season's amazing.
Yes, so there's so many good episodes, and I would agree that Duet, and for those of you who don't know every episode by name. This is the episode, like you said, it's toward the end of the season, and it features, and this general story has been seen elsewhere, where you've got this Cardassian who may or may not be this war criminal, this infamous war criminal, and so it is it's a very psychological episode. And again, this is not an episode where they're going off to some strange world and they're meeting these new, they have this emergency to contend with. This is an episode that takes place a lot on the station, and it's about character dynamics and scenes, and it's kind of it plays like a play in a lot of ways.
It does. It absolutely does. Yes.
Yeah, and so the strength of a lot of the performances, I think, helped to carry this episode, and of course, a really great script. Yeah, it's quite good.
Nana Visitor is just phenomenal in the episode. Yes. I love a lot of what she does throughout the first season. I think that she really rises to the occasion numerous times throughout the course of the first season in particular, and I think kind of rises towards the top of like can't miss performances when it comes to the show. But in this episode, she's amazing. Harry Yulin, I believe, is the name of the actor who plays Maritza, or is he? He's absolutely phenomenal as well. Odo gets some great stuff to do. Ducat has some stuff, some amazing. I mean, that's the thing. It's like we've talked a lot about the show, but we haven't even gotten the chance to even talk about some of the indelible characters that we're introduced to, in the first season alone. There are others that come later on down the road that maybe we'll get to in future episodes. But in the first season alone, we meet Garrick, we meet Ducat, we meet, you know what I mean? Like we get some of these amazing folks. We meet the Negus, we meet, we've got just so many richly layered guest characters in addition to our richly layered main cast.
Right.
So yeah, it's really hard for me to narrow it down to 3. I think if I absolutely had to back against the wall, I might say Duet, In the Hands of the Prophets, and Emissary. But then I feel bad because I'm leaving out Past Prologue, which I really love. I like Battle Lines a lot. I think Battle Lines
is very good. And of course, again, Dax, because you're sort of really setting up Dax's character in that episode and asking these big questions too.
Right? I think that Dax is an episode that honestly, in some ways, feels almost more relevant now than it did 30 years ago, which is incredible.
Yeah. Amazing, right?
Right. So I've given a non-answer. Basically, you could be the better of the two of us. What are your top 5?
Well, I think Emissary is such a strong pilot, and I would say that it's probably, in terms of this era of Trek, the best of them to set up the world in a really engaging way and to build on the franchise that has come before it. And I actually really enjoy Broken Bow, the Enterprise pilot as well, but it doesn't score as high for me as Emissary. And then, very similar to what you said, I think Duet is not just a standout episode in the season, but a standout episode in the series.
Yeah,
and really kind of shows toward the end of season 1 the kind of psychological stories that the world that they've created can hold. And I do want to talk about In the Hands of the Prophets, because I feel like that episode doesn't get as much praise as it should.
Yeah,
I think that episode is phenomenal. And again, to your point, I feel like in our era today, this has so much resonance.
Yeah.
And if you're not familiar with the episode, it is basically the plot hinges on the fact that the school on DS9 is teaching, and it's Keiko O'Brien who's the teacher in the school. Wynn, who is the one of the...
Look, all you need to know is she's played by Louise Fletcher, who was Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, for which she won an Oscar, mind you. Yes. And that's just... I feel like anyone who knows One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Ratched, like, you're good now. Like, that's all you need to know about Beta Quinn.
She is phenomenal throughout this show.
She is phenomenal.
She's particularly good this episode as a religious cleric from Bajor, who takes umbrage with the fact that this station is teaching basically science versus the religious beliefs of her people. and she starts this protest and interrupts in violence aboard the station. And so certainly, like, I can't imagine anything speaking more pertinently to our times. As I feel like we more and more are encountering issues like this, in the United States and all around the world. And I just feel like it's just another way that this show is, for lack of a better term, is such a Star Trek show, where it can take these situations from our lives and our world, and in the best way create these parallels in this science fiction environment that will allow us, and again, not like a preachy way or anything like that at its best, but it forces us to think about the world around us from a different perspective and in a different way, and hopefully in that way give us more clarity in the world around us. So yeah, I love that episode. I think it's great.
And I'll throw something else out there real quick too that I think it bears saying, because I know that there are people who love DS9 and do not like the character of Keiko O'Brien, but I think Rosalind Chow is phenomenal in this episode, and I love the way that she's written so strongly, and the fact that she's unwilling to budge when a lot of people, even at times O'Brien seems kind of like, okay, go, whatever. But like she's steadfast in her beliefs of what she's teaching and why she's teaching them and why they deserve to have this education. And it's really lovely. And I just think that, everyone in this episode is fantastic. And there's just some really, really incredible moments. It's an incredibly tense episode. The other thing that I love about it is that it pays off so many of the tensions that have been building basically since Emissary. Right. And threads that have been woven in through a number of episodes, and leads to the season 2 opener, which is not a 2-parter, but a 3-parter.
What?
And let me just tell you, when I watched it as it aired, I was simultaneously frustrated because it's like, what? I gotta wait. But at the same time, blown away by the fact that they were taking this chance and doing, you had, like, they're telling this a story that's this big. And while I firmly agree with the criticism that while the first 2 episodes are really, really good, that the third doesn't quite deliver as well as it could maybe on the premise of the previous 2. Although I do think that there are elements of the third. Part of what happens is I feel like there's this element of Star Trek in general. We talk about the great Star Trek reset button, where especially in the original series and Next Gen, pretty much nothing could happen that you couldn't just wrap up at the end of the episode and move on. And if you'd never seen the previous episode, you were fine. Outliers, of course, to that would be like Best of Both Worlds, which you've got not only those 2 episodes, but then you've got the episode after where Picard goes back to the family and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But anyway, I do feel like there's almost this tension of like, how far can we really pull this, and how much do we really need to wrap up at the end of the 3rd episode? And I feel like they might have pushed themselves to wrap things up just a little too quickly at the end of the 3rd. Whereas the neat thing is later in the show, they would definitely leave threads dangling and not be so afraid of tying everything up at the end of a 2-parter or whatever. Or in the case of like season 7, a 7-parter, which literally the first 7 episodes of like the 7th season are basically one long epic episode.
Right. Exactly. Right.
But yeah, I think that it was just really cool storytelling and very something new for Trek by kind of having this story weave through the first season, culminate in the finale, and then yet spill out into the first 3 episodes of the next season.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really gutsy move. And I don't know if, I don't know where they get the guts to do that in the opening of the 2nd season. If it has to do with the show being syndicated, I'm not sure, but it's so great to feel that kind of scope so early on in the show, and the storytelling in it too. And it's action oriented, but it also has to do with, it has these elements of suspense and mystery and espionage, and it's really great. And you've got an incredible guest performance in those episodes. Because that's Frank Langella in those episodes, right?
That's right.
Absolutely. So kind of a heavy hitter pretty early on there, which is great. Yeah, those are standout episodes in season 2. I do want to shout out one more episode in season 1,
Please.
which I don't think you mentioned the episode Progress. Do you remember this episode?
You have got to be kidding me. I was just getting ready to talk about that episode too, because I wanted to talk about an underrated episode. That's perfect, JJ. Yes, please talk about Progress.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely underrated episode. It's another episode that really lays the groundwork for Bajor and for Kira. And,
yes.
Really, I think sort of the central conflict for Kira Nerys throughout the show is that she is this former freedom fighter who has, for all intents and purposes, won the war. And now she has to learn to live in this world in which she's expected to help, civilization thrive. And so you have this perfect confluence of events in this episode where she's basically has to go down to this planet and try and mediate a situation where she's got to take farm equipment away from somebody so that they can do something else with it. And it feels like it's this small, intimate story, but it has such larger ramifications and repercussions, and it's just incredibly well done. And it's a lot of it hinges on the performances of the folks in the episode. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts, because I think that it's just, again, it's one of those episodes that it's like this sleeper episode, but it says so much without having to do a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I one of the things that I want to mention right off the bat is that Brian Keith gives just a wonderful guest performance in the role of Mullibok, and
playing the farmer. Yeah.
The farmer, that Kira bonds with and everything. And, to me, it's funny because at this point in time, I'd seen him in a few things, probably most memorable at that young age in the original Parent Trap, with Haley Mills. He plays the father. And so it was fun for me in a way, because it's like, oh, I know that guy. And and then getting to see him in this episode. And there's something very effortless about his performance, which is wonderful. And unfortunately, it would be one of the last things that he ever did, because within a year or two, I believe, he took his own life. But the relationship that's built between he and Kira over the course of the episode is so lovely and fairly low key, like you said, compared to some of the other big types of things that we have happen throughout the course of the season. I also love, as divided as they could be, as much as they could play against one another throughout the course of the series, the cast, the main crew, if you will, really comes together beautifully in this episode. And I love the way that Sisko especially has Kira's back, because throughout the course of the first season, especially, we see moments where Sisko kind of has to tell Kira what's up. You know what I mean? Kind of have to be like, there's even this beautiful moment in Emissary where at the very beginning, when he first meets her, she's like, "You've come to take my office." And he's like, "Oh no, I thought I'd come and say hi, and then I take your office." And it's this lovely moment where it's just sort of like, oh, he's nice. Oh no, he's letting her know, and yet in this episode, he purposely delays so she can have extra time. Bashir helps to cover for her. There's just some really wonderful moments, I think, with the rest of the cast that I really enjoy as well. But overall, I mean, you already hit on it. The fact is that this tells a very important story to the fabric of the entire series, especially about, who the Bajorans are, what they fought for, how they fought for it, what that means in the context of the whole. And I think that we see that crop up a lot throughout the course of the series, especially in these early seasons, because there are some brilliant episodes that deal with a duet being another one, for instance, that deal with the fallout from this conflict. And again, we'd never really seen stuff like that. I mean, we'd seen some stuff with the Klingons and there'd been the Klingon Romulan stuff in the, was it Redemption, I believe, 2-parter with Worf. We'd seen a little bit of that sort of strain, which again, that was Ron Moore, who again now is working on this show as well. And so I think that to see the way that this conflict played out, and to see what happens with these, for lack of a better term, these sort of extremist viewpoints that the Bajorans, had to basically use in order to win this war against the Cardassians.
Yeah, I mean, you have Kira who will, she's at some point she will actually own the term terrorist because
Yeah,
that was, I mean, given what they were experiencing under occupation, it's like these were the tools that we had, and
right.
like, okay, so this is airing on like the WB. All right,
Right. But again, even from the get-go, and this is the reason why I gave so much credit and praise to Emissary earlier as far as setting things up, is even in the very beginning, the first time we ever see Kira, she is arguing with the bureaucracy, the Bajoran bureaucracy about, we fought, I did not fight my whole life, to just give all, to give the yoke over to a new master, basically.
right,
And,
right,
with that potentially being the Federation. And,
right,
and she's very blunt, about some of these things. Right. And,
right,
and again, I just, I love that aspect of the character. And I love also where she goes and what she
right.
grows into and the evolution of the
Entire
character as
journey
well. But
because you're,
this, but
sorry,
I
go
think that progress. No, just to wrap that up. I do think that progress is a wonderful moment for that first kind of light dawning for Kira in a
yes,
way, and it really provides this wonderful springboard for a lot of what's to come for her character. Again,
right,
with Duet, In the Hands of the Prophets, the 3-parter that opens season 2.
yeah.
Her character just already is evolving and going some great places.
Right. Yeah. And just the realization that, by the end of the episode, Cisco kind of has to thrust on her, which is like, hey, you're not the underdog here. Like
Yeah,
you've lived your entire life as the underdog and now you're something else. And you have to be in this role now because you are needed in this way. It's not you spent your whole life fighting. Now you have to, it's like you're mediating, you're doing all these other things, these really hard tasks, and but again, like you said, like I have your back, but this is what needs to happen. This is your life now.
yeah.
You can't just give it all up and
Yeah, I mean,
let this guy
it's heavy.
stay on his
That's the
farm.
other thing. DS9
So
is
yeah,
never
it's
afraid to,
yeah, I think that's a really standout episode. But
yeah,
I'm curious for season 2, before we
yeah,
belabor the point
right.
for season 1, if you've got a couple of standouts for the second season.
Yeah, I think Cardassians, is a fantastic episode. Um, that has to do basically with a Cardassian boy who has been adopted by Bajorans.
Right,
um,
right.
and it's just such a brilliant episode, that is extremely emotional. And I think that one of the things too, that going back to progress real quick, but just the show in general, the show is not afraid to make tough decisions and to do things that aren't necessarily the people pleasers,
Yeah,
the audience pleasers, to give you all the warm and fuzzies. It's not afraid to make hard decisions, tough decisions, and it's not afraid to be morally ambiguous at times either.
right.
And I think Cardassians kind of embodies a lot of that. There's definitely an emotional punch to it. It asks some big questions, and again has to do with that fallout for the war. It's so fascinating because as much as people talk about DS9 being kind of the war series, because of course we get the Dominion War in the later seasons, which really engulf the entire show. The truth of the matter is so much of the show doesn't have to do with actually telling a war story as much as it does with having to tell the cost of war,
Right.
and it does so in these really wonderful ways. And I think that Cardassians is a great example of that. So that's certainly one of my favorites. I mean, Necessary Evil is, to talk about morally ambiguous. I mean, and talk about Odo, being able to take center stage. I mean, we've got Rene Auberjonois, you're going to have to give him some stuff, now and
Yes.
again. And this is probably one of Odo's finest moments. And again, it comes in season 2.
Unbelievable. Yes, that's a great one. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
love the Maquis 2-parter. I think that that's just fantastic. I mean, The Wire, which is the episode with Garrick, where they have to, Bashir has to try and save his life with the surgery, and they start to unravel a bit of Garrick's past.
Yeah,
And then of course, I mean, we get the Mirror episode, we get crossover,
yeah, absolutely.
um,
The Return to the Mirror
which
Universe. First time since
arguably, as much as I love the later Mirror episodes that we get, but arguably crossovers, like, I mean, crossover might be the best Mirror episode we've ever gotten, period.
Yeah.
Although,
Well,
I do love the Discovery Mirror stuff. I just want
it's
to throw that out there. I
a
actually
great
love
arc in the first season of Discovery
yeah,
too. Yeah, I would
yeah,
say probably the highlight of the first season.
without a
Um,
doubt.
I think that's where it kind of found its stride, and then it kind of had to
Yep.
wrap up. It's kind of be like, okay, we did that. Now we have to wrap up what we started before
Right.
that. It's a strange season of television, the
It
first
really
season of
is.
Discovery, but that's for another discussion. Yeah, all those episodes are standouts. Necessary Evil's great, and I love when we get a look at the station pre
Mm-hmm.
Emissary is always fun.
Yes.
Where you see Tarek Noor and its quote unquote glory.
Right.
It,
It's
there's
very
so
gray.
you
Everything's
mentioned The
gray.
Wire, which is great. That's a great Garrick episode. And there's one I'm surprised you didn't mention, which is basically a Twilight episode dropped in the middle of the season. Whispers, the O'Brien episode.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a great episode.
Yeah, it's I really like that one. And again, it's part of the DS9 genre of let's put O'Brien through the ringer, which
Right,
happens
right, right.
a fair amount of
It's
episodes.
DS9's own cottage industry.
Yes,
We
yes,
must
let's
torture
punish
O'Brien.
Miles O'Brien. And so Whispers, if for those who remember, and spoiler alert, O'Brien gets back from a mission and he feels like everybody is sort of everybody seems a little off. He feels like people are having conversations about him behind his back. This escalates into extreme paranoia. And the end of the episode, the big twist is that he's not him. He thinks that he's him, but he's actually a replica that has been created of O'Brien, who had been abducted during the mission. And so it is
Yeah.
this very, I don't know, I feel it's very Twilight Zone-esque, like in its climax and denouement, if you will. So that's one that I always think of from the second season. And then, in terms of a really Trek episode, Blood Oath, which is the return
Totally.
of the Klingon trio from the original series and fulfilling the blood oath that they had made with Curzon Dax through Jadzia. And that's a really fun episode. And you get to see these really great character actors revisit these roles that they had played separately in the original series all together with the modern sort of modern for the 90s Klingon sort of aesthetic and regalia and all that stuff. So I feel like that's a standout episode from the season as well, but a much more sort of typical Star Trek episode.
There's also in that episode, one of the things I love about that episode too is there's also some great Kira and Dax stuff in that episode, which I love their relationship in general throughout the course of the series. But there's this really because one of the conceits, of course, of Dax's character is that she has all of these memories and and all this, she embodies all these things from these past hosts for for the Dax symbiote, but Jadzia is still kind of new and kind of fresh in a lot of ways, and there's a lot that she has to learn, and I love those opportunities when Kira is able to kind of use her world weariness, for lack of a better term, and kind of take Jadzia under her wing a little bit, and in this episode it really kind of hits hard because there's this idea that it's you're going to kill people, you're going to go take lives when you do this. Right. I also love the fact that whether intentional or not, and certainly you could speculate about this all day, it really does this lovely thing of setting up all of Jadzia's connections to the Klingons in the future that will of course pay off big down the road, spoiler alert, when Worf comes to town.
Yes.
Which is really cool. No, Blood Oath is a great episode, and I did almost mention that one. The season finale, again, I feel like DS9 almost always nailed their season finales, and this is no exception because Jem'Hadar, this is two things about this is that they wanted to kick off the Dominion conflict earlier in the series, but the higher ups were completely against it. So the Jem'Hadar episode airs, and similarly to the conspiracy episode of Next Gen, which was supposed to have more of a follow up and they nixed, Jem'Hadar was supposed to have more of a follow-up, but it didn't get it until much later in the series. And the funny thing is I would argue, even though at the time I was a little frustrated with it, and frustrated with it upon my first rewatch that I did in the early 2000s, now I actually think it works even better because the Dominion continues to get mentioned throughout the course of the
Yes.
next season and a
Yeah.
half. And we don't get necessarily the immediate follow-up that they had originally planned. And I feel like it actually works better to draw that tension out, because season 3 gives us the opportunity to continue to grow these characters and prepare them almost even more for the storm that's coming.
Absolutely. And I feel like they can just weave more mythology in throughout season 3 and 4. So yeah, I'm with you there. I'm really glad that it worked out the way that it did. And you have payoff at the beginning of season 3.
That's true. Yeah, I forgot about
Not
that,
the
because you get the
Defiant, the
search.
Defiant is launched specifically because there's this new possible threat from the Gamma Quadrant. You have the two-parter, the Search, which is great episodes, and it's launching this whole new part of Odo's storyline, and but we're not going to get into those episodes today.
Can we talk about past tense a little? No, you're right.
No. Well, and that's the thing, because this seemed like, we were talking about how far do we want to get into DS9, because there's so much. It feels like the first 2 seasons are very much world building seasons, and there's a lot of things that don't happen in the first 2 seasons. And as you stated, like the Defiant is not introduced until the season 3 premiere. You've got Cisco. He's a commander. He's finding his way through all of these sort of political, spiritual, diplomatic issues throughout a lot of these episodes, and that continues on. But then more of these threads, like you said, the Dominion starts to become a bigger issue throughout the later seasons, and but the foundations are all in these first couple of seasons, which again, I think they're just, when people talk about the first 2 or even 3 seasons of DS9, I feel like they really, they should have a little more respect for some of the storytelling that's taken place, and especially, there's just, as we've been talking about, there's so many really great, exceptional episodes from the beginnings of this show. So if you haven't revisited DS9 in a while, and if some of these plots that we're talking about, either if they only seem vaguely familiar or if you're not remembering them at all, do yourself a favor and start that DS9 rewatch in celebration of 31 years. And that would be my suggestion. With all the copious spare time I'm sure you have.
Right, yes, exactly. But I totally agree. And I think that one of the things that, I sort of mentioned earlier, but it's worth reiterating, is that DS9 from the get-go asks some big, hard questions and addresses things thematically, topically, in ways that we did not necessarily see prior to this on, our science fiction in the US anyway. There were obviously politically, socially, morally, emotionally, some of the questions that get asked over the course of the show and the episodes and the topics that are covered without delivering easy answers. It's handled with a sensitivity, and sometimes, it's interesting because there is almost a strain of cynicism that runs through the show, and yet because it's Star Trek, it never gets too cynical. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It never gets cynical to the point where you lose hope. But there's definitely, I think that it's able to approach Trek in a way that was different from what we had seen before, and approach some of the questions that got asked in a different way. And I always think too that one of the things that really helps the show stand out was allowing for the main cast to have internal conflicts.
Right.
The relationship that we would see develop between Bashir and O'Brien, for instance, is so wonderful in so many ways, because they get this beautiful, lovely friendship, right? But early on, Bashir drives O'Brien crazy,
Yeah, rightly so, because he's written as somewhat of a grating character.
Yeah, totally.
And that's purposeful, it's like, that's not by accident. And then you allow that character to grow, but not in a vacuum. He's growing because of the interactions that he's having with the other characters.
Yeah.
And that's good writing. Like,
exactly.
People around you, they change you, and you change them. And
it's
all these characters grow together.
And it's the same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing with Cisco. You know, as a captain, I just don't know that we've seen any Star Trek captain grow and change in the ways that he did. You know, I think that
Yeah.
they came close at times. Honestly, I mean this. Even though it's not my favorite Trek by a long shot, I do think they came close at times with Archer. I do feel like Archer changed quite a bit over the 4 seasons of Enterprise, but I just don't know that it was enough to really like make that show sing, quite frankly.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the you know, again, one of the things that's always important for me to point out, because it's I know for a fact that it was important to him to point out, Avery Brooks, this was something that it was very important to him, is it's 1993. I don't have to make explicit some of the things that were being said, in particular about young black men by
Absolutely.
people in this country in the early 90s.
And the kind of legislation that was being passed in the mid 90s.
Exactly.
During, a supposedly very progressive, White House.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, yes.
And so to see a black man as a father, as a single father on television, and to see the way that relationship is so important to the fabric of the series, and to see the importance of a character like Jake Sisko, who, I think, and I mean no disrespect to Will Wheaton whatsoever, I think Jake Sisko and Sirach Lofton, are able to, again, that character was able to mean a hell of a lot more, and arguably maybe mean what in some ways Wesley Crusher should have meant to Next Gen, by giving us a different perspective on the events that were occurring. And I just loved where that character went. But even in the early days, even with some of those B plots, which I know people could sometimes like take issue with the stuff with him and Nog, it sets the stage for so much wonderful development to come. And and Aaron Eisenberg, I mean, as Nog,
absolutely.
and knowing where Nog ends up, I mean, it's just so much. I mean, we could spend another 2 hours talking about this. But we could.
That relationship. Yeah, we absolutely could. And Aaron's birthday was this week, and so there was people remembering him and on his birthday, and I had the absolute honor of getting to know him before he passed away. We had worked on couple projects together for his podcast, The Seventh Rule, which Sirach Lofton and Ryan Husk and company still have going strong. And I actually just guested on Friday on their Friday Star Trek and Chill podcast.
Nice. They recently had Ira Stephen Bear on actually as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they've got Walter Koenig on talking about episodes of TOS right now.
Right.
Yeah, so they're doing some cool stuff over there. But the relationship between Jake and Nog, I think just you watch those early episodes, and I think that relationship rings true for those characters and their ages. And I think that's what they were trying to do on TNG with Will Wheaton's character, with Wesley Crusher. The issue with Wesley, in a lot of ways, is that Wesley Crusher didn't have anyone to play off of except for these middle-aged professionals, and so that's tough, for a writer. That's tough for the actors. So it's like really like, oh, look at the child actor hanging out with the adults, whereas I think Jake's saving grace as a character is Nog. The fact that you have these two young people that are experiencing this station in the way that kids that age would have experienced it, with awe and boredom and a sense of sort of wiles and starting trouble and getting out of trouble and hatching schemes, and I mean that all works for me. Sam, the internet's a weird place because, at least for me, and I'm sure for many of the folks listening, because I'll watch a show like Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and I'll watch it for years before the internet has blossomed into the Venus flytrap that it is. And I draw my own conclusions about the things that I enjoy and the things that I might not be my favorite. And you go online and you're just like, this is how people feel about this stuff. And like, I can't tell you, like, I love the Loxana Troy episodes, and I always have. Apparently, a lot of people on the internet don't. I love Ferengi episodes. They're some of my
Mhm.
favorite. I think Quark is the
Oh,
secret weapon of Deep Space Nine.
yep.
Um, I think he's a character that could not exist on any other Star Trek series. And I think that when you talk about the show not slipping into cynicism, and I think part of that is because you have a character like Quark, which is cynicism embodied, but you
Yeah.
can tell that under the surface, there's more. And
Yeah.
he tries to hide it,
I
as
mean,
often as he can, but he can't.
he's Rick from Casablanca. You know what I
There,
mean? Like it's beautiful. I mean,
right.
yeah. Uh,
So I'm just
it,
always amazed where it's like, I see the fandom, and again, it's so hard to tell, like, the voices and the opinions that you hear online. Are you hearing the majority? Are you hearing a
right.
vocal minority, or are you hearing just a couple of people? And do their opinions somehow, are they driving the opinions of other people who may not have felt as strongly about it? I don't know, but I mean, there are so many parts to this show and to other Star Trek shows that I love that for some reason are derided among. You mentioned Keiko O'Brien earlier, and like
Yeah.
when I when I online and like people sort of dissing Keiko, I was just like, why?
Why? Yeah.
I guess my mind doesn't work that way. I'm not looking for you know
Like,
to
if I'm being
sling things. I
completely
don't know.
honest, I think that there is a heavy strain of misogyny that runs through that discourse.
Well, maybe that is. Yeah, maybe that
I,
is. I mean,
I can't help but feel like that's a big part of it,
in sci-fi
honestly.
fandom, really, Sam? You sure?
Yeah, I know.
Um, yeah, and that's unfortunate too. But yeah, I don't know. I think uh, maybe if you're enjoying something, if you're enjoying a show, I don't know that you necessarily need to seek out the feedback of people online that you wouldn't interact with on a
Right.
day to day basis about it. And but at the same time, the internet has also been a place where such beautiful fan communities can come together. And this sort of brings us back to Matt, right? Where you've got this guy who has such passion and such positivity um, for for the Quantum Leap show and for the universe that's being built. And that's the kind of example that I wish I'd seen more in these other fandoms, and especially a
Yeah.
niche fandom like Quantum Leap, where it was folks like Matt and folks like yourself and folks like Brian Green who runs Al's Place. Uh,
Yep.
they create space for people to like things
Yes.
and for people to discuss things in a civil and positive manner. And I don't think I think that should be the goal. I don't know. I think that should be the goal of internet fandom. Let's make places where people can like what they like, not places where people
Absolutely.
just endlessly gripe about what they don't like. And there's place for that too, but it's just like you don't have to base your whole personality on that. I don't
Right,
want
right.
to.
It's yeah. I mean, I think it's always going to be a bit of the dilemma. I mean, engaging in that discourse because it's just so easy. I mean, I'm not saying anything new whatsoever, but it's so easy to fire off those tweets or to make that Reddit post or to go to those message boards, the Trek BBS or whatever. And I wonder too sometimes how much of it also just has to do with with marketing. I mean, it is no secret that there are literally people that were within the company making this show that did not want to like and support this show.
Mm,
It made them money. They didn't understand why, and they didn't like it, and they have not promoted it, marketed it, taken care of it,
yeah,
restored it, remastered it, sold it in any way, shape, or form that would let you think that this is the classic piece of television that it genuinely is.
yeah,
I mean, when a show, all due respect to anyone who loves the show dearly, when a show like Voyager gets more attention than DS9, I scratch my head because I'm sorry, they are not the same.
they're not the same.
you
And
know,
I love Voyager, but you love it in a different way than you love a show like Deep Space Nine.
Yeah,
And not that Voyager again, we're talking about two shows from the not too distant past to only exist in VHS quality right now in the world
right.
of 4K high definition streaming. So,
Yeah,
I don't think that has anything to do with the shows. It has everything to do with the studio that currently owns them. And so
yeah,
hopefully, again, you and I chatted not too long ago about the future of Trek and the future of uh, Paramount Global, and at some point in the not too distant future, I think it's pretty clear that some other overseer is going to have purview over the Trek archives, and
yeah,
we'll see what their attitude is, and uh, where some of these legacy shows end up in terms of remastering and just in terms of the the place of stature that they might have moving forward. Um,
yeah,
you know, Even though there's not a ton of official DS9 stuff out in the world right now, I am very happy that I could do a print for our little episode of Fate's Wide Wheel here that's focused on
yes.
DS9. So you've seen it, but not many other people have seen it yet. But we're going to debut it online when this episode drops. So I don't know. Do you want to take a look at it? Should we do
I
anything
think that
else?
would be a wonderful idea.
Okay.
I'm really excited about this. It's funny because when last week as I was kind of stumbling through, what to do and what's next and how to approach everything, I genuinely just thought like, let's, kind of like what we do with Doctor Who, let's pull something up that you've already done, let's talk about that. Let's do that. Let's just make it kind of easy. And then of course, 24 hours later, you're sending me amazing stuff of something new and something beautiful and brilliant. And I think everybody should have the chance to share in it and delight in it as much as I already have.
And there it is.
Yeah,
I'm calling this piece DS9 at 31. Um, I really, I really wanted to create, something that celebrated the entire vastness of the show, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the Patreon exclusive video that for the making of this piece. But it started with a lot less, and then it sort of I built it up a little bit more and played around with it, and I just want to try and include a lot of characters, a lot of storylines, a lot of color, and give Ben Sisko his due as
yeah,
as one of the best captains in the fleet. So you've got the main cast in this. You've got a lot of my favorite recurring characters. You've got some antagonists looking over at the top, and you've got some friendlier faces at the bottom. So I hope people like this print. It's if you're watching this, it's available now in the Fates Wide Wheel storefront, which you can access via fateswidewheel.com or directly through the Studio JJ site at jjlindell.com/FWW shop. So, any notes for me, Sam, looking at it now again? Should we make a last minute change to it? Who's not on here that should be on here?
no, I think it's perfect. I really do. I can't wait to have it on my wall. And no, I think it's just it's a wonderful tribute, and it's a wonderful way to kind of honor those 31 years and all of these characters and these actors and the storytellers that brought this together, and the wonderful design elements. I mean, obviously getting the station on there and getting the Defiant on there. I mean, I think that's one of the things that luckily a show like Star Trek does have a lot said about it, whereas other shows sometimes it goes a little unsung perhaps. But I mean, the production design of the Star Trek shows is always just so wonderful and so rich and well thought out. And sure, maybe the buttons don't really mean anything, and who knows what the hell that's saying across the screen or whatever, but ultimately it's still everything kind of serves a purpose. And it always looks really cool. And I think the DS9 again, had the opportunity to stretch what that meant and right down to the space station. I mean, the fact that that is not a space station built by Starfleet, right?
No
That
way,
is,
right?
and how awesome is that the site of our, I mean, that's the other thing that's kind of interesting that we didn't even touch on, right? The Cardassians built this thing.
Right.
This is a Cardassian space station that our crew, our Federation is inhabiting and living in and working in and fighting for. And I don't know, there's something really kind of beautiful and poetic about that as well. So
Yeah,
no,
and
I think it's
yeah,
wonderful.
station built because of an occupation on
Right.
top of it, and now the site, hopefully, of a lasting peace and pathway for independence for the majority people. Yeah, it's a good show. Deep Space Nine.
Yeah,
It's a
pretty good.
it's a good show.
Check it out.
Well,
You can
I'm
find it on
glad you like the
Paramount
print.
Plus.
I hope others like the print. If there's a character that you love from the show that's not on this poster, they're just behind them. They're on there. They're just
Exactly.
standing right behind them. Morn's back there.
Yeah, I was
Keiko's
just getting
back
ready to
there.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Morn's behind Worf. That's my story, and I'm
Yes.
sticking to it.
Sitting on his stool. Not saying a word.
Yeah.
Or chatting up a storm, depending on who you talk to.
No, I think it's wonderful. Thank you so much for doing
Thank
that. Thank
you.
you for
Thanks for the
sharing that.
opportunity. And
Yeah.
hopefully people like it. And we'll hopefully, if people like the prints that the episode prints that we're offering for episodes of Face Wide, hopefully we can do more and keep adding them to the shop, along with the the Quantum Leap episode posters that I've been doing for the last season and a half. And I'm looking forward to designing the final 5 for season 2 in the coming months as well.
Yeah. I mean, exciting stuff on the horizon, no doubt. And I hope that, obviously would love to get feedback on what folks thought of our conversation and what you think of Deep Space Nine. I did ask some folks earlier to kind of share some of their favorite episodes, and some that were obviously named that we already talked about, like Duet, Necessary Evil, The Wire. Duet got mentioned numerous times, as it should have. Dax was another one that got mentioned. Necessary Evil again. The Mirror Universe episode crossover, some outliers that we did not talk about. QLess actually got mentioned, which is actually probably one of my least favorite of the first season. But
Yeah.
but that's the wonderful thing, right? Is it's like getting to find things that other people enjoy is always a pleasure, and I love about these conversations. Babel is another one which I'm not a huge fan of, but I can certainly understand why some people would like it. That was another
I
one
think
that was mentioned.
Mabel's a clever episode. Anybody mentioning Move Along Home as their top?
No one mentioned that. Dramatis Personae is another one that got mentioned, which I was kind of surprised about, but again, I can see it, and it is an interesting episode. It is kind of a little bit more. Odo gets some good stuff to do in that episode,
Yeah.
If I remember right. So. Yeah, so I really appreciate everyone who commented about that, and hopefully we can kind of keep that conversation going, because what I would love to do, hopefully JJ you're on board, is I would love to revisit this in the future and talk about seasons 3 and 4, talk about
Absolutely.
5 and 6, talk about 7, talk about what we left behind, the documentary, which is beautiful.
Absolutely. And what?
And lots of other stuff.
If I can, if we're thinking about doing releases in the future tied into Fate's Wide Will episodes, if we talk about Deep Space Nine again, if we're featuring specific episodes, are there episodes of Deep Space Nine that folks would want a Fate's Wide Wheel DS9 episode poster for? I'd be curious to know what episodes would jump out where you'd want the kind of treatment that I've been doing for Quantum Leap. I've got a number of DS9 episode-centric posters in my portfolio, and I'd love for an excuse to release them if folks are interested. So
Absolutely. And I would love
that's
the
cool.
opportunity to do some deeper dives on some of the episodes, and and to really get into, the nuts and bolts of what was happening behind the scenes, what made them work, contextualizing them. I think that's something would be fascinating to do with DS9 that, we always tried to do with the classic series of Quantum Leap, is to contextualize it when it was written and contextualize it in today's times. Because again, as we talked about, I think so many of the episodes are so relevant today. Maybe even in some ways more so than they were at the time that they were produced, which is fascinating.
Right.
And I think that that's what good, speculative fiction, science fiction should do, honestly, is it's something that should remain relevant, but also be able to speak to the future in ways that, we're unaware that they're going to have that effect on
Yeah.
us.
We'll have to do our
And there's a
research.
number.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How is Move Along Home is about the first Iraq War, right? Maybe there's a connection.
There's something. There's
Yeah, there's
something
something
there
there.
for sure. I mean,
We'll look into it.
it's got a song.
It's
Um,
right. That's true.
it's the musical episode.
Alamo Rain, come to for Alamo Rain.
Oh boy, it's one of those few, and I always hesitate to say this, just because I never want to put this on anyone, and for all I know, they loved it. But sometimes I swear that's an episode where you could watch and you could just see the groan behind the actor's eyes, like you could just see the like,
I
oh, I'm
have felt
doing it,
that. Yeah.
I'm committed, but
Yeah.
yeah.
If nothing else, that episode has led to anybody who watches Star Trek Lower Decks, they've had some fun referencing that episode
Nice.
in recent seasons. So check that out if you are behind.
Yeah, absolutely. I am behind. I'm behind on that, and I'm behind on Prodigy. Although I literally have the Blu-ray of Prodigy sitting in front of me.
Well, if you have here's something with Prodigy. It's great if you have the Blu-rays, and you and I are big physical media fans. But if you do have Netflix and you want to watch
That's right.
Prodigy, you should stream it just to show Netflix that there is an audience out there for the show. The second season is going to premiere at some point in 2024, but if enough people are watching the show and streaming it, people are excited about Prodigy, which you should be because it's a fantastic show for all ages, and it's one of the best Star Trek series out there right now. They could finance a third season, so stream those episodes.
Absolutely. Yeah, stream those episodes. Here's something that's interesting, actually, that I read recently. But Strange New World season 3 is going to start production, I believe, in like about a month or so. I think it was in February.
They're already in production.
On season. Okay, all right. I didn't know if they were in front of a cameras yet or what, but yeah, I find
one of the cameras. I think that this week they are starting to shoot episode 2.
Fantastic.
So they're well on their way.
That's awesome. That's so cool. I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, I love Strange New Worlds. We're going to get the Section 31 movie with Michelle Yeoh, which I think is also super cool because it's like she won an Oscar. If she wanted to just kind of be like, nah, I don't want to do this anymore. I mean, I'm not fair, but like, it's awesome that we're going to get that film, which I think could be a lot of fun. There's rumors and rumblings of a Picard feature film as well.
Yes,
the internet seems divided in opinion on that, but I'm just going to go right ahead and say, you ready for this? I don't care if we already got a satisfying ending, which I feel like we did with season 3. If they want to make more, I will gladly let them make more. Just
Same.
do like I will absolutely pay my money down to go see that, and part of it is because I have faith. Of the heart. No, I have faith that that the people that are working on this, are committed to producing something good. I don't think that Patrick Stewart is going to sit there and be like, oh yes, let's go just produce whatever gobbledygook you throw at me. Like he wants it to be good.
He doesn't need the work,
No.
Yeah.
No. So anyway, I think that one of the properties that I genuinely feel you hear all of this talk about the mishandling and blah, blah, blah of Star Wars, of Marvel, of DC, yada, yada, whatever. I would like to think that if there is a property that does not get that, thrown its way as much these days as Star Trek, because I feel like there's a lot of exciting, wonderful stuff that Paramount has been doing with it lately. And I just think that there's so many wonderful things. We've got the final season of Discovery coming up, which I think, in a way it's sad that it's the final season. On the other hand, I have a feeling that they're going to go out on a high note. I feel like with Strange New Worlds, I just love it. I
think we're just getting started with Strange New Worlds. I hope. I think there's a lot to do. So, and I think that show is an A+. I think they're doing great work. So,
For sure.
See if they
Yeah.
up their game further.
So anyway, we've talked a lot longer than I anticipated, which is really nothing new for this show at all. But I'm happy to have done it talking about something that I love so dearly, which is Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It's one of my favorite shows. I totally sent JJ a text, and I was just like, look, when it comes right down to it, I think DS9, Doctor Who, and Quantum Leap might just be kind of like my holy trinity of televised sci-fi. Like, I just like everything else is great, and there's so many other things I love, but those are my three. And the fact that I get to talk about all three of those things on this show from time to time, and the fact that all three of those things are currently in production is also just lovely and awesome and amazing. Well, not DS9 necessarily, but Star Trek is. So spiritually, it's there.
Yes.
But
absolutely.
yeah, my wish list for the future, real quick. Just remaster it. I know it's going to cost a lot of money. I know it's going to be hard work. I know you're going to literally have to go back to the original stuff and recut and re-edit and redo all that. Just do it. Just do it. There's a market for it. People will buy it.
It's gotten easier and easier to do this work because of the technology. Because if you can just locate the reels, they have these wonderful machines where you can feed the reels in. You feed the episode from the original broadcast. If you can just get all of the footage into... get it all digitized, the computer will recut the episodes for you. It will be able to, it can tell where the footage is from, and it can place where the scenes go. And, there's more to it with that with a show like Deep Space Nine, because there's visual effects which were created after the fact that would need to either be recreated or up-resed. But at the very least, if you can go back to the original footage, and shows have done this that have special effects, any footage without special effects, you can remaster the 35 millimeter, and then any scenes that have special effects, Odo, things like that, you could do an up-res. And honestly, if that's the least that we got, I think that at least is a way for this show to get its due and not feel so dated when you watch it, especially for younger viewers who, there's a certain suspension of disbelief in any drama. And it's really harder, I think, for people to suspend disbelief if the literal footage is not of the quality that they're used to. But
yeah, and you know what? One thing that another thing I'll throw out there is that I delight so much, because talking about new viewers coming to the show or younger viewers coming to the show, in seeing new Deep Space Nine viewers and their commentaries online and social media that I see so often. I've seen it over on the DS9 subreddit. I've seen it on Twitter. I've seen it multiple places where someone who's never seen DS9 before, they skipped over it, right? Oh, I saw Next Gen, and then I watched the original series, and then I was like, and I watched a little Voyager. I dipped my toe in Enterprise. I'm loving Strange New Worlds and Discovery or whatever. But I was like, somebody finally convinced me to go back, and then just seeing their appreciation.
Yeah.
Just kind of getting those holy shit moments out of them, because the show dares to do what few Treks have ever done before or since, and tells stories in wonderfully mature ways.
Yeah.
While also keeping its sense of humor about it, not being too dark and depressing, unlike maybe season 3 of Enterprise. But yeah, I just love seeing the show through new eyes, and anything that could bring more of those eyes on the show, including, like you say, a remaster or something. I'm all for. It's not just out of like self-interest of like, I want to see the show look good. It is literally also out of the fact that like you're saying, more people could come to it that way. And while I've resigned myself to the fact that like Babylon 5 will likely never get that, it's just not going to happen. We should be happy with the Blu-rays that were just released. At least they're, in 4:3, even though the show was actually shot with widescreen in mind. The special effects were not created for that. So at least with the new Blu-rays, you get something that looks better than what we've seen when the widescreen stuff was released, a decade ago or whatever. So at least there's that. And there was a remaster done, but it was just basically like a quick sort of upscaling as opposed to a true remaster, I suppose. But that said, I have not given up hope on DS9.
Nor have I. So time will tell. Just got to hang in.
Yeah. So yeah, please let us know your thoughts and opinions on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Let us know your favorite episodes. Let us know if there are specific episodes that you would like to see JJ a print for. If you would like to hear us talk about more in detail, I would love to get your feedback on that. Of course, there's lots more to come. There's lots of Quantum Leap left to talk about. As you know, as we kind of wait for news about when the show will come back on the air, and as kind of navigate the next few weeks at least. I don't have a set plan, surprise, over what will be talked about. There could be some interviews, there could be some other stuff going on. I know that everyone's very busy right now, but certainly there are a couple of things that hopefully will happen. The stars will align, etc. But in the meantime, I certainly look forward to having a lot to discuss and have fun with. And JJ, as long as you're game, I'm sure we'll find something to talk about.
I can't wait.
Excellent. Anything to say before we get out of here?
Thanks, everybody, if you're still listening.
That is always the question, isn't it? Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Thank you all so very much. I really cannot tell you how much I appreciate everyone's love and support, and just being here and listening and being a part of the community, and a part of the wonderful fandom that is not only Quantum Leap, but that is everything that we get to touch on, whether it's Star Trek or Twilight Zone or Doctor Who, whatever, side trips that we get to take here at Fate's Wide Wheel. I'm always grateful for the opportunity to do that, because there's just a lot of stuff that I love and enjoy, and I want to share that, and I want to get the chance to love and share and enjoy all of that with you. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening and watching. Hit the like or subscribe button. So close to hitting some of those benchmarks, which would kind of help propel the show to that next level. But I'm not going to get all shilly, because it still doesn't really feel appropriate, so I'll just leave it at that. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, take care of one another, stay safe out there, and always leap responsibly.